This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Downing Street apologizes to Buckingham Palace for two staff parties held the night before Prince Philip's funeral. Mali military leaders call for major protests against sanctions as the UN calls for clear election calendar. And tennis star Novak Djokovic to be detained again ahead of another court hearing in a bid to avoid deportation. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I am Peninah Karibe, and with me with the business headlines is Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area launches a new cross-border payment system. And Ghana's economic growth inches closer to pre-pandemic levels. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. There have been protests in Mali's capital, Bamako, and other cities as citizens responded to calls by the military junta for them to express their anger over fresh sanctions. Mali's ruling military leaders were angered by financial and economic sanctions imposed by West African regional bloc ECOWAS in response to delays to the country's democratic elections. At a meeting in Ghana's capital, Accra, on Sunday, the bloc announced the closure of land and air borders with Mali, suspension of financial assistance and economic transactions, and withdrawal of all ECOWAS ambassadors from Mali. Meanwhile, the European Union said they will also impose sanctions that fall in line with the ECOWAS ones to put more pressure on Mali. Mali's military leadership still enjoys considerable support among the people. Meanwhile, the United Nations is urging Mali's ruling junta to announce an election timetable amid anger over its decision to delay elections. UN Chief Antonio Gutteres says this could improve relations between Mali and the international community, in particular the West African bloc ECOWAS.
ECOWAS decision establishing that if Malian government presents an acceptable timeline and takes steps in that direction, then there will be gradual lifting of sanctions. And of course, I'm working with ECOWAS and the African Union to create conditions which can allow the government of Mali to adopt a reasonable and acceptable position to accelerate a transition which has already been underway for a long time.
Earlier, we spoke to CGTN's correspondent Ren Thompson in Paris about the EU's decision to fall in line with the ECOWAS sanctions on Mali and what this means for Mali. Take a listen.
The first thing to understand is France is now leading the European Defence Pact ever since they've taken on the EU Council presidency. These meetings of defence ministers will be held in France under the guidance of the French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian. Jean-Yves Le Drian called them all to a meeting in Brest in France on Thursday where they were able to come to an agreement alongside the European Commission High Commissioner on Foreign Policy, Joseph Borrell, to really agree to these terms and the movement towards these sanctions. Le Drian outlining after the call that this is a European issue because it includes more than just a French military presence in Mali formally. I mean, there are nearly 1,000 German troops on the ground there as well. And the goal with these is to really suffocate leaders, to have them conform to the demands and the policies, what the European Union and France are asking for in terms of their previous commitments to upholding democratization in the country, but also seeing that they move towards this progression. The goal really is to cut off resources both financially and structurally. You heard about ECOWAS closing the borders so that they see a little bit of difficulty in terms of importing things. Air France, the flag carrier of France, cutting off their connection to Mali as well. No more flights going through effective as of today. And there will also be these financial and trade cuts, really cutting them off from the global financial system so that they cannot move money around as easy as they have been able to previously. It's been about 1 month since France has really drawn down its military presence there. Over the past 8 years, since the last French president was in office, there's been over 5,000 French troops on the ground there fighting this fight that they had really tried to push for in terms of democratization of Mali and moving them away from what they'd previously been at. These sanctions, according to Josep Borrell, the EU High Commissioner, are a response to the Wagner Group's arrival as a way to suffocate the leaders of Mali from being able to pay for them, to support them, and to be able to engage in this game. They do also say that further sanctions are expected from the European side by the end of January. There will be ongoing discussions here in France, but also in Brussels, as these foreign and defense ministers try to come to some kind of consensus about what they can do on this situation.
Now, UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says she is concerned over further allegations of government members holding parties during COVID lockdown in 2021 when the country was under strict social distancing measures. This comes as Downing Street apologized to the Buckingham Palace for two staff parties held the night before Prince Philip's funeral. The latest revelations have prompted reactions from opposition parties who are now calling for the resignation of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The Foreign Secretary, however, maintains that more important matters remain at stake, including post-Brexit negotiations with the European Union over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Northern Ireland is UK territory that remained part of the European Union's borderless trading market when the UK left the bloc. Let's get more on this. We have CGTN's Andrew Wilson live for us in Oxford. So, Andrew, Operation Boris Johnson over the party scandal, what's the latest?
Well, we had the apology from Boris Johnson in the House of Commons on Wednesday, following the latest allegations on Monday that there was a party in May 2020 which no one had hitherto talked about or known about. So that apology went out, and it did seem to do go some way to satisfying at least people in his own party. Now, since then, revelations again of two more parties, this time happening on the 16th of April, which was the night before the funeral of the Duke. Country was supposed to be in a period of mourning. The different reports that have come from that party thus far that haven't been clarified, but there were suggestions of alcohol, dancing, music, people being out late, and this party spilling out into the garden of Downing Street. There's no suggestion the Prime Minister was there at the time. He was at his country residence outside London, but nonetheless it raises another question mark over the internal discipline of Downing Street and the behaviour of the civil servants that work within it. So this again has added another layer. Now, after the apology on the Wednesday, all his main cabinet ministers pledged their support, and that's extremely important for them to show that they still back their Prime Minister. And among that number, crucially, was the Foreign Secretary as well, Liz Truss.
Right, Andrew. And the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, says she is concerned about further allegations in the party scandal. Let's listen to what she said.
When I heard about this, I was, of course, very, very concerned. And I understand that people across the country are angry about what has happened. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister did apologise for mistakes that have been made. We have the inquiry taking place by Sue Gray, and we are very clear that there were real mistakes made. I completely understand people's anger and dismay about what has happened. The Prime Minister apologised to the House on Wednesday. I 100% support him to continue getting on with the job, and what people want is they want to see us working to deliver for the people of the United Kingdom. My priority is sorting out the Northern Ireland Protocol. Of course, we need to get on as well with the recovery from COVID, building the economy, and I think that's what people want to see us focus on.
So, Andrew, what's next with the Prime Minister after all these apologies and after the inquiry is over?
Well, you heard Liz Truss there giving her support for the Prime Minister. It wasn't that convincing, was it? She doesn't sound that confident about supporting the Prime Minister. She's saying what she can under the circumstances. And so what will happen next is that this inquiry that's being held by a senior civil servant into all these allegations of these parties in Downing Street, these latest two will be added to the list, and she'll investigate those as well. When that inquiry reports back, it won't necessarily recommend action against the Prime Minister or point fingers, but it may talk about a culture or a lack of judgment within Downing Street or something like that. When that inquiry is published, then it'll be up to the Prime Minister's own party to decide how it wants to react to that. The opposition can't remove the Prime Minister. There's no general elections coming, so it has to be his own party if they want to. Now, if his party is shaken by the results of this inquiry when it comes out, there are two things that can happen. One is that there can be a two senior cabinet ministers, for example, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, or perhaps the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss. That would undermine the Prime Minister so much that a leadership competition would almost be certain to follow after that. The other thing that could happen is that the backbenchers, the junior members of Parliament, who are also getting restless about all these stories about parties, could group together and deliver letters of no confidence to the senior backbench MP in the House. If he gets more than 54 letters of no confidence, that also triggers a leadership debate. It's quite a lot of letters, but bear in mind in total there are 360 Conservative MPs in Westminster, so it only needs about 15% to call for a leadership competition, and that will happen as well. It's what happened to Margaret Thatcher, and it's what happened to Theresa May. So it may also happen to Boris Johnson, but there's nothing the opposition can do to remove him from power. For that, they need a general election, and there's nothing scheduled for at least another 2 years.
All right, Andrew, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Andrew Wilson reporting live from Oxford. Now, Ukraine has been hit by a massive cyber attack with government websites, including the Foreign Ministry, targeted. Messages warning Ukrainians to prepare for the worst appeared before the sites went down. The source of the attack is currently unknown. Our correspondent Guy Henderson reports from Kiev.
We're standing inside Ukraine's Foreign Ministry in the capital, Kiev, this Friday morning, just a few hours after government officials confirmed what they described as a massive cyber attack that downed the websites of several key government ministries, including this one, but also the Ministries of Defence and the National Security Council. Clearly, as you can see, officials are keen to demonstrate that they can, despite these attacks, continue as normal. This is an event to mark the Orthodox Christian New Year. In attendance, we have the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. We also have ambassadors from the likes of Cuba and NATO country Latvia as well. Officials have been keen to point out that they are working to quickly restore the operations of these websites. They say that no personal data has been stolen and that the content on those websites have not been affected. They have now asked the cyber police in Ukraine to conduct an investigation to find out who might have been responsible. Important to point out that no blame has been apportioned yet, but obviously given heightened tensions between Russia and Ukraine after a week of what appears to have been a failed round of diplomacy, people I think are asking, is this just another isolated incident, or could this be the beginning of something more significant? Guy Henderson, CGTN, Kiev.
Russia has held an annual review of its diplomatic successes and challenges in 2021. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hosted the press conference against the backdrop of increasing tensions with the West. Concerns over the potential expansion of NATO into Ukraine dominated Lavrov's remarks. Stuart Smith reports from Moscow.
He's speaking after a very high-level negotiation taking place over this week. 3 meetings, one with the US, one with the Western NATO military alliance, and one with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, all to try to find agreement on Russia's 3 big demands: that the United States remove nuclear weapons from Europe, that NATO allies stop deploying troops and holding military exercises in Eastern Europe, and also a guarantee that Ukraine and other post-Soviet states do not join Europe. That, after Thursday's meeting at the OSCE, seemed to indicate there was no room left, no more road to go down in terms of negotiations. No breakthroughs have taken place, but we heard from the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov that he says they are waiting the West's response. No decision has been made. Russia is waiting for written proposals, written responses from the West, and notably, Sergei Lavrov said today, despite there being discussions with NATO allies, the OSCE group of countries, really what they're looking for is the United States to lead this. He says it has to be guarantees from the United States that Russia will mostly listen to. However, he says they will not wait forever in Russia for a response, and if there isn't a response, he didn't outline exactly what would happen, but pointed journalists to President Vladimir Putin's comments from a previous press conference where he said that Russia's response will depend on exactly the problems the West has with Russia's proposals, and they will be decided in conjunction with the Russian military.
The Australian government says it will detain Serbian tennis player Novak Djokovic this weekend after again stripping him of his visa in a dramatic setback to the tennis world #1's goal of winning a record 21 Grand Slams. As time slips away before the Australian Open starts Monday, the 9-time title holder heard in an emergency hearing that he will be in immigration detention from Saturday morning. The megastar's bid to avoid deportation will be heard by Australia's federal court on Saturday. The government has agreed not to deport the 34-year-old Serbian tennis ace until the hearing is over. The Australian government said Djokovic, who is unvaccinated for COVID-19, may pose a risk to the community. Ethiopia is preparing to stage a national dialogue. The process aims to resolve political differences, including over the ongoing civil war in the northern Tigray region. Ahead of that national dialogue, the government has released a number of political prisoners. As CGTN's Gutteres reports, opposition leaders are already proposing a new national constitution.
Preparations are now underway by Ethiopian authorities to stage the much anticipated all-inclusive national dialogue. Addis Ababa believes this would be a forum that can deliver key answers to sticking political questions and differences of the country.
We have worked alongside other stakeholders for the upcoming all-inclusive national dialogue to be a story of success. We expect this dialogue to guarantee long-lasting peace, and all stakeholders have deliberated on which kinds of decisive political measures should be taken. These discussions, intended to successfully hold the national dialogue, took ample time and were held between the parties and the government.
In preparation for the talks, Ethiopia has released dozens of well-known political prisoners. High-profile names include Jawar Mohammed and Iskender Nega. In the latest press conference since his release from prison, Iskender said his party will demand a change of the current Ethiopian constitution.
The main agenda we'll present in the national dialogue is a change of the existing constitution of the country. One cannot make any dictator regime into a democratic one through any reforms. There is no such global experience. Those nations which transformed from dictatorship to democracy have devised a new constitution.
Fact check. Addis Ababa promises the national dialogue will be democratic and transparent.
Based on its last experience, the government is building strong institutions, and these institutions are working freely, basing themselves on the national interest of the people.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has promised a national dialogue to bring all political stakeholders together to discuss grievances which include regional border issues, the question of identity, constitutional reforms and amendments, among other issues. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up, South Africans told to brace for 5th wave of coronavirus infections.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The U.S. State Department has warned Somali leaders against further delays to the indirect parliamentary elections and threatened to impose targeted sanctions, including visa restrictions. The ongoing elections have been repeatedly delayed after it failed to conclude on schedule. Mohammed Kahir has the details from the capital, Mogadishu.
The U.S. has asked Somali leaders to adhere to new election timeline and conclude the parliamentary elections by 25th February. The process was delayed several times before, following disagreements among Somali leaders. Analysts say Washington is impatient with the delay of Somali election process that has created security tensions in the country.
One could read the American statement as a leverage to pressure Somali politicians to expedite elections, and Americans will not tolerate any delays of Somali elections. And a significant number of Somali politicians have a Western passport or citizenships, and any visa restrictions will have adverse impact on them.
Analysts also link the tone used by the State Department to changes at the White House.
It's the change of administration in the U.S., in Washington, in which Joe Biden wants to see elections taking place in Africa. He wants to counter the rise of populism in the Horn and in the channel of the continent. So he wants to assert the American influence in Somalia.
Member of Parliament say Washington must respect international relation norms, while its recommendations to expedite elections are welcomed.
Somalia is an independent state with its own sovereign land, air and water boundaries that need to be respected as per the United Nations Charter and the UN Security Council treaties. Therefore, all governments have the right of non-interference in its domestic affairs.
The ongoing Somalia's parliamentary elections are expected to conclude towards end of February, before the schedule of the crucial presidential elections is released. Mohammed Kahir, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
To Burkina Faso, where 12 people, including a senior army officer, are in custody over a plot to destabilize institutions. According to Armed Forces Minister Aimé Barthelemy Simpore, the 12 are among 15 people arrested since Monday after the plot was uncovered. Those arrested include 2 officers, 7 non-commissioned officers, a senior officer and 5 civilians. Of these, according to Simpore, 2 civilians and a soldier have been released after giving preliminary testimony, leaving 12 in preventive detention. Simpore said the arrests were ordered by prosecutors at a military tribunal in the capital, Ouagadougou. The West African country has a long history of coups. It's currently battling a militant insurgency that swept in from neighboring Mali in 2015.
The Ministry of the Armed Forces and Veterans presented an oral communication to the Council of Ministers to report on the referral to the Public Prosecutor's Office of the Ouagadougou Military Court, which led to the arrest of military personnel and civilians for allegedly attempting to destabilize the institutions of the state. This legal action, which was decided by the military prosecutor, follows report by a soldier who was allegedly contacted by a group of individuals to join the group in order to carry out destabilization actions against the institutions.
South Africans have been warned to brace themselves for a 5th COVID-19 wave. The National Department of Health and health experts announced in a virtual press briefing on Friday that even though it's unclear when the new wave is likely to hit, it is definitely coming. South Africa is currently dealing with the 4th wave of the pandemic, driven by the Omicron variant. CGTN Zulis and Jamila has more details.
South Africa's economic hub, the Gauteng province, has officially exited the fourth wave of COVID-19 infections. This is while the country's 8 other provinces have reached their peaks of the same wave. That's according to the National Health Department and a number of health experts here. But they warn that that is no reason to celebrate yet, as the Omicron variant, which has been driving the fourth wave, is still with us.
Omicron is not gone, it's here. It's only that, fortunately, as we have said, its severity has been manageable. So at this stage, as to when it will be completely gone, as already mentioned, we really don't know.
South Africans have now been cautioned about the impending fifth wave.
Health experts say while they cannot predict the timing and the severity of the next wave, they're quite certain that it will not be as severe as the first 3 waves.
We're fairly sure there will probably be a fifth wave. I think as to the timing, as we've seen with the other waves, I think very difficult to predict an exact timing. But as with all the other waves, I think there's multiple factors which do play in. And as we've seen with all previous waves, it has been driven by a new variant.
I think in terms of the fifth wave, we have to see what the winter months will bring. We have to, this year will teach us whether we are moving towards a more endemic nature of SARS-CoV-2. But as long as we have ongoing transmission, there's a possibility of viral evolution. And so it's going to be critical for us to continue the excellent surveillance that we do and try and make sure we can pick up any variants that may cause a next wave.
It was also revealed in this virtual media briefing that only 40% of South Africa's adult population has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The government's target for vaccination is at least 70%. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Health Department in Tunisia announced that the North African country has witnessed the emergence of COVID-19 outbreaks in schools as the result of the high spread of the new Omicron variant, coupled with low vaccination rates among children. More than 13,000 teachers are still unvaccinated in Tunisia. Adnan Shawashi tells us more.
Teachers' unions in Tunisia have called for the temporary suspension of classes at schools across the country to help reduce the spread of coronavirus in educational institutions. Authorities closed several primary and secondary schools to break the chain of infection.
The so-called solution of the scientific committee is not practical. It's impossible to apply preventive measures and social distancing while the classrooms are overcrowded with students. The health protocol does not exist in educational institutions. Face masks, hand sanitizers, and disinfection operations are not available, while the majority of students are not vaccinated.
The Scientific Committee to Combat the Coronavirus recommended keeping schools open. The COVID-19 task force did not suggest a return to the rotational attendance system.
The rotational attendance system is not efficient to stop infections. It's useless to study one day and to stay at home for the next day. We recommend closing any class where 3 students test positive and shutting down the whole school when there are positive cases in 3 classes. Following health protocols and vaccinating all school staff is the best solution.
Many university students believe that campuses should remain open, while others are calling for shutting down all Tunisian universities.
All students are wearing face masks in class. Most of us are vaccinated and social distancing is respected. Closing the campuses is useless.
Unlike secondary and primary schools, universities are equipped to study online. Shutting down campuses for 1 or 2 weeks will not affect us because we can study at home. It is better than spreading infections in public transport. We can later return when everyone is vaccinated.
The Education Ministry revealed that no serious cases have been recorded among children affected by Omicron. The rate of vaccination among children aged between 12 and 15 years is still low in Tunisia. The Health Department in Tunisia announced that with the emergence of the Omicron variant, the COVID-19 task force decided to reduce the 7-day quarantine period. An infected student can now return to school after a 5-day quarantine if their test is negative.
Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
All right, let's now catch up with the day's business news. We'll cross over to Ucha for the latest.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area launches a new cross-border payment system. And Ghana's economic growth inches closer to pre-pandemic levels.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Now, Africa's new cross-border payment system was launched in Ghana's capital, Accra, on Thursday. The Pan-African Payments and Settlement System will facilitate intra-regional trade and payments by enabling the real-time transfer of funds from one African country to another. Now, traders have until now had to settle payments via US and European banks. Its developer, the African Export-Import Bank, says the new system is expected to save the continent about $5 billion in offshore clearance and transaction costs. Now, the system has already been piloted in the West African Monetary Zone, which includes Nigeria. It is also one of the key building blocks for the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is expected to be fully operational in 2030. The AFCFTA could become the world's biggest free trade zone by area, with a potential market of 1.2 billion people and a combined GDP of 2.5 trillion. Meanwhile, sanctions by the Economic Community of West African States on Mali have drawn a strong response from Mali's people. Earlier in the week, ECOWAS imposed additional sanctions on its member Mali, whose military government is demanding a longer transition period, and that's following a coup last May. The new measures include the withdrawal of all ECOWAS ambassadors in Mali, as well as the closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Mali, and the suspension of all transactions between ECOWAS member states and Mali.
As we have said, the Malian people do not deserve these sanctions. In no case should the people of Mali be sanctioned in this manner. These people have done nothing wrong, and I think those responsible for the chaos in Mali are well known. At the beginning, ECOWAS had taken targeted sanctions against the political authorities who do not want to take concrete actions that could bring us to the end of the transition.
ECOWAS is determined to stay the course and not lose face. This sub-regional organization wants to be credible, but is no longer credible. ECOWAS is no longer credible because we have seen that in some countries, presidents have made constitutional revisions to extend their mandate at the head of their country, and it has done nothing. This way of doing things is likely to prove that this institution is no longer credible. It is not an organization at the service of the people, but at the service of certain heads of state.
And heading to Ghana now, the country's economy is inching closer to pre-pandemic levels. That's after taking a hit from the coronavirus pandemic. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting the West African nation's economy will expand by about 6.2% this year. But as Ghana's economy tries to rebound, traders say the high cost of goods and services is now taking a toll on many businesses. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reporting from Accra.
The new year has started on a slow note for Rosina Edujemfi. She sells groceries at this market in Accra and says people are not coming to buy food.
Many people have used their money to celebrate Christmas, and because the groceries are now very expensive, consumers are not coming to the market.
Like Rosina, other traders in this market say business is off to a poor start.
Most of the things I sell here are imported. Since last year, the cedi has been depreciating against the US dollar, so it's now more expensive to import food products.
Despite these concerns, the government says Ghana's economy looks positive this year. The IMF has projected the economy to expand by 6.2%. Still, traders are concerned about the cost of goods and services shooting up this year. Last year, the hikes in fuel prices linked to changes in global markets fed through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy. The cost of transporting food to the market went up, and traders had to pass the extra cost to consumers. Economists said as the global economy recovers from the pandemic, Ghana's economy is also likely to gain.
Once you hear commodity price going up, then you know that economies like Ghana, which is commodity driven, obviously we stand to gain, because we deal in a lot of commodities like gold, like cocoa and all of that. So once the price of these products are going up in the global market, obviously you would expect that we're going to be earning some foreign exchange, and that in itself will increase or boost the growth that we expect to have.
Like many traders in this market, Rosina Edujemfi wants the projected economic growth to translate into the cost of goods and services going down. She believes it will help many businesses recover quickly from the shocks by the pandemic. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And here in Kenya, the government has been accused of defaulting on millions of dollars in fuel subsidy payments. The debt is now sparking disquiet amongst oil marketing companies. Stakeholders in the sector say the government has not paid a single cent for the December-January review, which amounts to about $70 million. Now, this is in addition to other pending payments for November last year. The delays are said to be causing cash flow problems for marketers, especially independent firms that tap bank loans to pay for the fuel and also food distribution costs. Now, the Oil Marketers Association of Kenya say that they want the government to pay interest on those delayed funds in what will come with another cost to taxpayers. And South Africa's Energy Minister, Gwede Mantashe, has told Parliament that Shell's plan for seismic testing on the country's wild coast has received all necessary environmental approvals. Now, the Energy Minister also said no shortcuts had been made in the process. On December 28th, the South African High Court blocked Royal Dutch Shell from conducting seismic testing offshore off the Wild Coast. This is the latest ruling in a case brought by environmental groups and residents against Shell. Now, environmentalists protested against Shell's plans for seismic blasting. They say its underwater acoustics are harmful to marine animals, especially migrating whales. Shell says its planned exploration has all the needed regulatory approval, and it will significantly contribute to energy security if resources are found. Now, South Africa is a net importer of petroleum products. The government is eager to source feedstock for the state-run Mossel Bay gas-to-liquid refinery. But environmentalists in the country are pressuring oil companies to stop prospecting for oil anywhere. Meanwhile, oil exploration giant Royal Dutch Shell is in talks with about 5 local oil and gas companies in Nigeria to divest its stakes in onshore oil fields in the country's oil-rich Niger Delta region. The sale could fetch the oil giant up to $3 billion. The company has been active in the region since the 1930s, but is currently on a global drive to reduce its carbon emissions. Here's CGTN's Deji Bademosi with more on that story.
The planned divestment by Shell does not come as a surprise to players in Nigeria's oil and gas industry. It's been in the works for some years now, and for many, it creates an opportunity for local companies to step in and increase their stake in the country's oil and gas industry. The Nigerian government, which runs a joint venture with Shell, has played down concerns over the planned divestment.
It's a business model for Shell. Whenever they operate in territories, after a while, they divest from certain areas, especially when they see that local competence has grown. And in Nigeria today, the local competence has grown, as you agree. And that's why Shell wants to divest only in the onshore and the shallow waters. They are still in the country in the deep waters.
Some industry experts, though, think otherwise. Shell has stakes in 19 oil mining leases in Nigeria's onshore oil and gas joint venture. While it holds a 30% stake in the venture, the Nigerian government holds a 55% stake, while Total Energies and ENI hold 10% and 5% stakes respectively.
As far as I'm concerned, the divestment by Shell is not because locals have come of age. We already have local companies, or what we technically call indigenous companies, contributing their quotas. Shell is technically running away from business climate hostilities.
You may say that divestment will throw in opportunity for indigenous companies, but at the same time, it's sending signals to the international community that Nigeria is not a safe place to do investment. So government has been trying to counter this kind of campaign, so that is the basic problem. Overall, Nigerian economy will have bear some of this, the brunt of the divestment.
Beyond its global plan to cut down on its carbon emissions, Shell has been facing several challenges with its onshore operations in Nigeria. It's since shifted focus to deep offshore operations, seeking to dispose its onshore assets.
Many issues are now being raised concerning the divestment. First of all, the indigenous companies that are interested in the divestment in the oil fields are currently engaged in negotiation with Shell. But there are some other issues that are coming up that people, observers and experts are raising for those who are interested, particularly the issue of abandonment and the commissioning of some of the oil and gas assets in those areas, which of course may prove very serious for whoever will be taking on this asset.
5 independent Nigerian oil and gas companies have shown interest in the assets and are in talks with Shell. The bidding process is expected to be opened by the end of this month. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Egypt is in the midst of a major overhaul of its current railway sector. It wants it to fit a new eco-friendly network. A budget of $46 billion has been allocated for the first 10-year phase that ends in 2024, compared to only $2.6 billion that was spent in more than 3 decades between 1980 to 2013. While CGTN's Yasser Hakim spoke with the chairman of Egypt's National Authority for Tunnels on the development of the electric railway project, as well as China's role in the process.
حاليا 3 خطوط مترو أنفاق
We are currently constructing 3 underground metro lines, namely the 3rd, 4th and 6th lines. We are constructing the light rail transit line to connect Cairo to the eastern suburbs and the administrative capital, and which will be inaugurated soon. And there are 2 monorail lines in the 6th of October city in the west that will connect Cairo to the east with the new administrative capital.
We want to get more details about the light rail transit and all the information about how the project is being done, when it will be ready, and the number of passengers, for example, that will be using it, and the cost of the project.
Light rail transit. The light rail train will be introduced for the first time in Egypt. It's being done in cooperation with China, which is our partner in our smart transport strategy, and covers 108 kilometers. The light train connects to the metro lines to link the eastern cities of Greater Cairo and the administrative capital, and also connects with the high-speed train to reach the north of the country in Alexandria, the north coast and Alamein city. The light rail has 22 carriages in the first phase and will carry 45 to 55,000 passengers on each direction every trip.
What is the benefit of these projects for the economy in Egypt and for the Egyptian citizens?
Any projects established by the state are aimed at having a positive impact on the citizens. First, we'll be increasing speed because time is money, so we are investing in time. Secondly, we are transforming from the traditional fuel-run engines to eco-friendly electric transport vehicles. This will save on the fuel cost, has a positive impact on the environment and the health of the passengers. The trains will transport larger numbers of people faster, therefore they will not need the traditional transportation or cars, which reduces pollution, relieves the burden off roads and traffic, and economically benefits Egyptians. It will also operate as a freight transport line. The current traditional trains transport goods at a speed of 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. The high-speed train will transport at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour.
China is working with Egypt on a couple of these projects. Tell us more about your cooperation with China.
The 2 countries have a long history and cooperation in many fields. In my sector, it's the electric rail transport. We have close relations as China is successfully contributing in the funding and construction of the projects. The Chinese companies are working hand in hand with local developers to build the network. China is also providing us with the train carriages, and a large portion of the financing is from China. Everything is going as planned and has proved a successful cooperation.
Thank you very much for joining us here on CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, we'll be taking a look at Egypt's growth plans for 2022 and how the country plans to finance these. Well, let's head into a short break now. Just stay with us. My colleague Peninah will be back with more news after this.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Conservationists in Rwanda are struggling to control a growing gorilla population following successful efforts to raise their numbers in the Volcanoes National Park. Officials say they are now focused on expanding the park while working to reduce human-wildlife conflict. CGTN's Joy Kiruki has the story.
The Virunga Range expands across Rwanda, Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Along with Uganda's Bwindi Forest, it acts as the world's only habitat for mountain gorillas. The Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda boasts of accommodating hundreds of mountain gorillas. Despite this conservation triumph, the creatures are now fighting for space to grow and thrive.
In the past 50 years, the park lost 54% of the size of the park. And when all efforts were put in place for the mountain gorilla population to recover to the current numbers, the habitat has not changed.
We recorded 7 silverback deaths. So that's, again, a consequence of more groups ranging in the same area, really not expanding and going to the rest of the park, and that leading to more intergroup interactions, and then more infanticides.
According to workers in the Rwandan park, the number of gorillas has risen from just 880 in 2010 to over 1,000 by 2015. This is after decades of poaching that has caused a plunge in the population.
We are aiming in the next 10 years to expand the park by 37 square kilometer, which correspond to 23% increase of the effective habitat of the park.
Stronger security measures to prevent human-wildlife conflict have sought to win over locals. Today, 10% of each park ticket is dedicated to community projects, while 5% is allocated to a compensation fund for villages. This has helped turn the gorillas' fortunes around, as they are now seen as key to the community's financial future. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
And coming up in sports news, Ghana and Gabon prepare for a crucial group stage match at the Africa Cup of Nations.